Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, everybody, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Glad you're here. It is Maritime Monday, and it's a special Maritime Monday. Um, I know we've been talking about it before. We did another program, same thing last year, this time because November 10th was the 48th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We did a remembrance show last year. I should probably put the link down to that at the bottom of this one here. But we're doing something a little bit different than we did last year. I don't want to repeat the same program. But it's kind of this one kind of hits me different. I don't know why, but this is one thing that I've always been fascinated with or interested in or I guess particularly moved by since I was a kid. Long before any thoughts of being probably even being a lawyer, let alone someone who works in maritime industry with shipping accidents and disasters and things. This has just always been around since the song came out. And 1975, November 10th, the Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. Nobody really knows why, but we're gonna talk a little bit about it today. We're gonna start off with part of a video from good friend of the channel, Maritime Horrors, and then I want to read from the. It's not the most thrilling read, but it's one of the more in-depth things you'll see. It's the report that was prepared by the National Transportation Safety Board after a nearly 2-year investigation into the accident. And after that, we'll wrap up. We'll wrap up the show. But this show for me, again, it's kind of serious, and I've always been very, very emotional about this. And this and the Gordon Lightfoot song. Now he's passed in May of this year, and they did something very, very very, very special for him at the Maritime Cathedral there. When they rang the bell after his passing, they rang the bell for the Edmund Fitzgerald sailors, and they added an extra bell ring for him, which I thought was very, very special. But I want to go through this again, taking a little more seriously than we normally do, because I don't know. There's just something about this case that will never not capture my attention. That will never not fascinate me. That will never not draw my attention to it. But we'll still read the super chats as they come in, and the dog cam achievement will be unlocked at the appropriate time if such a thing is going to happen. Marv White says the song absolutely is the reason I watch every Maritime Monday. A weird interest seeded long ago. Yes, and that's what I said last year, and what I'm going to say again this year. Thank you so much for that, by the way, Marv White. The song, I mean, everybody. Okay, are you even human if you don't like the song? But assuming everybody likes the song, we listen to the song, we sing the lyrics to the song, we know the lyrics to the song, but this kind of puts the story behind the lyrics. So maybe you can get a little closer to the story, get a little more in-depth knowledge as to what's really being talked about, what's really being sung in those lines. So that's kind of how I want to approach this. Just so you know. I guess the thing to do is just jump straight into this story. Again, we'll read the super chats as they come in. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe thing, do all the YouTubey stuff. We put up our poll here as always. It's a very simple poll again on keeping the shenanigans out of the poll as much as possible. Just please hit the like and subscribe, and make sure you're subscribed. 51% of you said okay. So far, 49% of you have said done. So I appreciate that. And wow, Steve Gosney coming in strong with the big guns. says, thank you so much for making Brucey the one-eyed wonder dog a success. God bless you, Jeff. Well, thank you very much, brother. Appreciate having you here. Appreciate you being here. And thank you so much for that crazy generous super chat. That's that puts that alone puts us right there. And with Marv's, that puts us over halfway to unlocking the Doggo Cam achievement. But let's start with this video here. This will give a little bit of a background about the Great Lakes and some of the things that will happen on the lake, as well as a little bit of the history of the company that is responsible for the Edmund Fitzgerald, that built the Edmund Fitzgerald, that and a little bit of the background leading up to the incident that we're going to talk about, the actual sinking. And hey, Ron, thank you so much for your super chat, brother. Appreciate it. Did you watch the ceremony the other day? I didn't, but we're gonna watch some pieces of other things. I just get like weirdly, like strongly emotional about this thing, and I always like end up in tears because of this thing. So we'll see how long it takes for me to end up in that situation today. But let's bring this on up here. And this is, again, Maritime Horrors. The link is down there below in the chat. I mean, in the description. Make sure you go over and check him out. He's a great friend of the show. I appreciate him letting us use all the videos that we do. And there may or may not be a little collab between us coming up at some point in the next couple of months. So stay tuned on Maritime Horrors for that particular event. All right, let's go. This is the background information, the history of the Great Lakes and the Edmund Fitzgerald.
On the 10th of November, 1975, the largest ship to ever sink on the Great Lakes slipped under the waters of Lake Superior and took every member of its crew with it. The exact cause was a mystery that spawned a massive investigation, but the truth remains shrouded even to this day. This vessel, the Edmund Fitzgerald, remains a stark reminder of the dangers that mariners face when going to sea on the waters of the Great Lakes.
And that's an important thing to note about this is any of the information we have about the actual circumstances regarding the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald comes from another vessel that was 16, 18, 19 miles away at any given time, and some radar plots and a few obscure, not very informative radio conversations back and forth, and an exploration of the actual wreck itself. Other than that, there's no eyewitnesses that survived.
The Great Lakes. How do you describe something so vast to someone unfamiliar with them? These aren't simple run-of-the-mill backyard freshwater lakes. They're as vast as seas. I could tell you they are the largest freshwater system in the world and contains 84% of North America's fresh water. In fact, they contain 20% of the world's fresh water. The largest lake is the largest lake in the world based on surface area. This lake aptly...
I can think about that. 20% of the world's fresh water is in these lakes. That's how big these things are. So when we're talking about lakes, we're not talking about the little things out there in your neighborhood. We're talking about literal oceans. They're seas. They behave just as oceans do, except the waves tend to be sharper and more frequent, just because of the dynamics of the size and shapes of lakes as compared to open oceans. So they behave like oceans, but significantly more dangerous.
Named Lake Superior could fit the 4 smaller lakes of the Great Lakes inside of it. It's 350 miles wide, 160 miles long. Its average shoreline is 2,726 miles long, and it's an average of 500 feet deep and a max of 1,332 feet deep. But those are just numbers. They don't give you a true scope of the lakes or an idea of how dangerous they are. What about the fact that the lakes are home to an estimated 6,000 shipwrecks and the graves of nearly 30,000 sailors?
Now, those numbers sound ridiculous. 6,000 shipwrecks in the bottom of those lakes, and 30,000 sailors have lost their lives on the Great Lakes through history. And those numbers appear to be accurate. I mean, I remember the first time I heard those numbers, I went, absolutely impossible. But do your own Google searches, do your own checks. Those numbers are accurate. 6,000 shipwrecks and 30,000 bodies at the bottom of these lakes. While we're paused here, Stingy, thank you so much for being a member for 12 months. A year with the law racks and my ship tongue twister couldn't put happy year for me. Well, thank you so much for being here for a year. And Crazy by Proxy has been a member of 4 months, says this is my favorite story. Well, I hope we will do your favorite story justice this evening. Flux has been around for 14 months. I beat Stingy's 12 months, haha. Lol, wow, 14 months already. Holy boobs. Well, thank you very much for keeping this serious and straight, Flux. You know, I count on you. And Lynn Barry, thank you so much for the super sticker. The super sticker of someone saying yippee. Thank you so much. And Nicholas Starv's Trial Watch. Hey, yo, sailors and seamen, don't drag it out. Let the skipper have his hands on approach first. Thank you. Thank you so much for your words there. Let's get back to this again. 6,000 shipwrecks. 30,000 lives lost on these lakes. Those are staggering numbers.
These massive freshwater seas are more dangerous than most would believe, and yet they are nonetheless extremely useful. Around 125 million tons of cargo are shipped across the Great Lakes every year, 40% of that being produced from America's breadbasket, things like wheat, corn, oats, and soybeans. But another 40% are minerals and important ores, iron, taconite, coal, salt, and stone, fueling the U.S.'s huge industrial machine. In fact, our story centers around a massive powerhouse in that industry. Ordered on February 1st of 1957 by the Northwest Mutual Life Insurance Company, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was going to be an absolute behemoth of a lake freighter. At the time, she was designed to be exactly 1 foot less than the maximum allowable limit on the Great Lakes, 729 feet. This being because the locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, often just called the Soo locks, were 730 feet. Her beam was the maximum allowed limit of 75 feet. At the time of her...
See, look at they're talking about the maximum length and the maximum width of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's limited. It was limited by its size because of this lock that you can see here. This is how you get through the various passages into the other lakes and get through other systems. They dig these channels, these locks, and they're limited in its size. So you have to open it. It's really cool if you can see something like the Panama Canal or things, how they run these locks, where they raise ships to different levels, where there's other bodies, where they're connecting to other bodies of water that are higher or lower than them. So if you're going through the Panama Canal from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean, they're actually at different heights given the coastline. So you go into one lock, you put your ship like in a bathtub, basically, that's square, sealed off on 4 sides. You raise it till it matches the water level in the next lock. They drop the wall, your ship sails into the next lock. Then they raise that to meet it's just like they walk a ship up steps or down steps to get into places. And this was limited in its length. So there's basically when they lock there's a foot, and you can see the width. You can see the width of it. This ship is built exactly to fit within the width of this lock here. There is no space on either side of this ship of the Fitzgerald so that it can squeeze through these locks. I mean, that's how much thought and consideration goes into building these ships. That's what they needed to get through. So that's how they built it. They built it to just squeeze through so they can squeeze every single inch of cargo space out of the ships. And that's where we are.
Commissioning, she was the largest ship on the Great Lakes. She would be a whopping 13,632 tons and could carry well over 25,000 tons in her hold. She had a crew of 29 and was driven by massive steam turbine engines that pushed her along at 14 knots. Named after the president and CEO of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Edmund Fitzgerald, the man had a vested interest in Great Lakes shipping. His grandfather and 5 of his brothers were all mariners on the Great Lakes. On top of that, his company had large stakes in the coal and iron ore industries, which would explain why they were willing to fit the bill for the $8.4 million ship, just over $81 million when adjusted for inflation. Laid down on the 7th of August, 1957, she was commissioned the 7th of June, 1958. Now, this was where the superstitious type may take note. Her commissioning did not go off without a hitch. There were...
Now, and this is the thing, ships christenings are big deals. We're living in 2023. We're living in an enlightened age. But I would say there's no group of people that are more superstitious than actors and sailors. Sailors are probably the most superstitious group of people you will ever see out there. Maybe sports figures are super superstitious as well. You have the one shirt you wear to every game because if you don't wear that shirt, you're going to lose. Things like that. You're not going to cut your beard until things like that. But the sailors are openly superstitious and wildly fanatical about it. And there's omens. Omens mean things. And the launching of the Fitzgerald was not a particularly good experience. That's what they're going to talk about here.
Few clear issues. A crowd of an estimated 10,000 people watched from set-up grandstands, from the piers, even some watching from rooftops to see the mighty Fitz launched. But when it came time for Elizabeth Fitzgerald, Edmund Fitzgerald's wife, to break the ceremonial bottle of champagne across the bow, it took 3 tries. But the Leary ceremony had only just started.
That's kind of the worst thing that could happen.
The ship slid down the slipway and entered the water at a dangerous-looking angle. After self-righting, it sent a wave into the opposite pier and slammed into it. There was a wave of shock and excitement, and a middle-aged man from Toledo even had a heart attack and died. It was foreboding, to say the least. Any older mariner will, of course, tell you a bad christening is a sign of bad luck.
As far as christening goes, they don't get much worse than that. Yeah, by Francis, 3 tries is huge bad luck. Yeah, they can't break the christening champagne. The actual launching of the vessel into the water was a little extreme. Somebody has a heart attack and dies during the christening ceremonies. It was off to a very, very inauspicious start. And as I said, sailors are incredibly superstitious people.
But in spite of her precarious christening ceremony, she continued to be outfitted. The company, in the famous words of John Hammond, spared no expense.
As far as I know,
massive power plant would make her one of the fastest freighters on the lakes.
Are superstitious.
Her pilot house had the most advanced navigational and charting equipment, as well as top-of-the-line radio and communications equipment. The Fitz's interior could honestly be described as lavish. 2 guest staterooms, a guest lounge, a comfortable captain's office and quarters. There was a laundry room and recreational deck, and the crew staterooms were larger than industry standards. There were 2-person rooms with deep pile carpeting, many featuring tile bathrooms and personal showers. All of them were air-conditioned. They were furnished well with a desk, bookcases, chairs, and a closet. The lounges featured leather seats and recliners, drape-covered portholes, and a large panoramic stern-facing window that showed a beautiful view of the lake. They also had a full kitchen with all the amenities to provide meals to the 2 dining rooms on board. The ships would be leased by the Ogilvy Norton Mineral Firm for a 25-year contract. They immediately made it the flagship of its Columbia Transportation Division fleet. The lavish and large behemoth was considered a reward to be attached to. They stacked their crew lists with the most skilled and proven mariners in their fleet.
And again, that's something to point out here. The loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald, by any account, did not involve any negligence on the part of any of the crewmen. They said they had the best of the best on this thing. And while we're paused here, Nunya Bidna says, Jeff, have you done an episode on Death's Door in Lake Michigan? I have not heard of Death's Door in Lake Michigan. Is it sort of like the there's like the triangle there? Is it sort of like that area? That's something I'll have to look into. And not that, Susan. Thank you so much for being the first new member of the day. Join the Clean and Sober crew. Thank you so much and welcome aboard, Susan. Or not that Susan, I should say. We're glad to have you here. And Ike bringing the 50 Aussie bucks. I lived on Lake Superior for 2 years. I learned of the Fitz when I was there, but it didn't hit home until about November 2010, when I experienced a storm there similar to what the Fitz went down in. Glad I didn't experience it when I was at sea. Yeah, right towards the end, we'll have a video of a little tiny little bit of a weaker storm on the lake that can show you just how bad it can get in a very, very small storm comparatively. But thank you so very, very, very much, boosting us ever so close. Looks like we're about $8 away from releasing the doggo cam. And Nunya Business again with a $2 super chat. Jeff, have you talked about Death's Door on Lake Michigan? Well, I have a strong feeling of deja vu with that question. Thank you very much again. I have not. I'm not aware of that, which I'll check it out and we'll see what we can learn about it. I'm always interested in learning more. And if there's a particular story that you want to hear about, I'll add it to. We have a huge long list of stories that we can get to, but email me a story with links and descriptions, videos if possible, to thelegalvices@gmail.com. Oh, okay. All right. Wait. Nicholas, that's not the one I was clicking about. I didn't mean to interrupt the conversation between you two there. None of your business. Death's Door is an area where different currents meet and creates very dangerous waters and causes lots of wrecks. I have heard of it. I haven't done a story on it. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Death's Door is fascinating, says Rare in History. Lots of shipwrecks in that corridor of Lake Michigan off the top of the Door County Peninsula in Wisconsin. Cool, thanks. Yeah. Please send the information there to thelegalvices@gmail.com. So thank you very much for that.
She would make her maiden voyage on the 22nd of September 1958, leaving her berth in the Rouge River near Detroit, Michigan, and sailing to Silver Bay, Minnesota to retrieve a load of taconite iron ore. Her very first trip, the ship set a Great Lakes tonnage record, the first of many records the mighty Fitz would set. To those in service in the Great Lakes Fleet and to those living in lakeshore communities around the Great Lakes, Fitzgerald became something of a folk icon. The red and white monolithic vessel captured fascination and attention wherever she passed, carrying cargo loads that were thought to be impossible prior to her creation. She remained the largest until 1971, the whole time embodying the industrious spirit of the Great Lakes manufacturing and the United States. Onlookers would line the Sioux locks to watch the ship pass through. She was even nicknamed the Singing Ship due to her captain, Peter Pulser. Pulser assumed command in 1966 and drove a tough ship, setting a single haul record of over 30,000 tons 4 times. In 1969, the Fitz hauled a yearly haul record of 1,349,404 tons. But Captain Pulser was an eccentric and friendly skipper. To boost morale, he often piped music over the ship's loudhailer. Whilst passing through the Sioux locks, he was known to go onto the bridge wings with a megaphone to give facts and information to onlookers as they passed through. He remarked fondly that he still received letters about this well into his retirement. The Fitz would receive numerous nicknames over her career: the Toledo Express, the Pride of the American Side, and of course, Mighty Fitz. She was the pinnacle of Great Lakes shipping, even into 1971 when she was refitted from coal firing to fuel oil fired, only increasing her speed and endurance. By 1975, the Fitz was still well into her prime, not even done with her initial contract and not even a third of the way through her expected service life, one that could have easily lasted into our modern day. The 9th of November 1975. At 0830, the Big Fitz is moored at the Burlington Northern Railroad docks. She begins loading.
Now this is here we are talking about the events of the day leading up to the accident.
26,116 tons of taconite for a trip from Superior, Wisconsin, across Lake Superior, through the locks and south to Detroit, Michigan. The process of loading was lengthy, as it always was. The loading foreman and deck boss working in tandem to ensure the proper distribution of ore throughout the massive ship's hull. Too much to one side or the other, and she'd risk capsizing, of course. But too much along the center line, or amidships, and she'd drag belly out of the port, or worse, hog and break her back, something that had killed several ships before her. But by 14:15, 6 hours later, she was hauling in her lines, underway, making way. As they passed out the breakwater, a Janice Armagost stood on the breakwater with her 2 kids. She was hoping to catch a glimpse of her husband, Michael Armagost, the third mate. But failing to see him, she yelled to a deckhand asking where Mike was. He responded that he was below decks. Janice would be the last person to see any of the Edmund Fitzgerald's crew alive.
Wow.
At command of the Fitz was Captain Ernest McSorley, age 63. The Toledo native captain took the reins from his predecessor, Captain Pulser, in 1972, and ran a completely different ship. He maintained a customary distance from the crew, maintaining a professional atmosphere. He was a good businessman, too, with his mind on scheduling and timetables. The company saw him in good favor, as he ensured the vessel stayed profitable. But he wasn't disliked or even off-putting. He was very respected for his skills and professionalism. The season would soon be over. This was likely one of Fitzgerald's last trips before putting up for winter layover, the time of year when ships either dry docked or docked for the winter to receive repairs. The locks would close and the lakes would freeze over up until the spring thaw. There was rumor that this would be the skipper's last season. Captain McSorley had been to sea since he was 18, and a captain of ships since 1951. The weather that day had looked promising. The National Weather Service had been tracking a big November storm, but predicted it would pass south of Lake Superior. But by the late hours of the 9th, that proved to be false. The barometer was quickly dropping, and it was evident that the storm would hit Superior, and hard. Around 1630, another freighter, the freighter Arthur M. Anderson, would be departing Two Harbors, Minnesota.
Now, keep the Arthur M. Anderson in mind here. I was saying that a lot of what we know about the accident took their information from the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson, who was at points leading the Fitzgerald on roughly the same course, and at other points following the Fitzgerald. But yes, anywhere between close and 16 miles, 18, 19 miles distance. And we'll also talk a little bit more about the Arthur M. Anderson later during the search and rescue efforts, and even up into modern days. We have one super chat here from Rolf Scold. Thank you so much for the Canadian 20s. I'm so sorry if this is a misunderstanding. It seems I'm being considered Remy's stalker. I will do whatever it takes to clear my name so Remy Stalker can be found. I have no idea what any of that means. That kind of sounds like something between you two. I don't know what that means. I entered the MTC on July 20th, 1988 for the Roanoke, Virginia mission. Interesting. I believe we entered on the exact same day. I believe that's when I went to the missionary training center in Provo, Utah. It was July 20th. It was July 19th or July 20th. I get what it would have been 20th because they only do it on like 1 day a week. So yeah, I guess we probably went in the missionary trainings together the same day. All righty, cool. Unleashing the doggo cam. I was just trying to do that for some reason. Doggo cam is being. I just need a new USB cable. It's being jerky. So I'll keep trying to get Doggo Cam up. If not, we'll just do it. We'll do a freebie Doggo Cam tomorrow. If I don't get it up and running. Because it was earned yesterday. It was earned today for tomorrow if we can't get the Doggo Cam up and running. But right. Let's move. We're going to show this for about 2 or 3 more minutes. Then we'll get on with the reading of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board report. some of that. And again, thank you, Rolf, for that. I don't know. I don't know what the problem is, but
Just ahead of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but heading on a parallel course. The slightly older Anderson was initially shorter than Fitzgerald upon construction, but after a refit, she was lengthened to be a bit longer than Fitzgerald, though was noticeably slower. She would be passed by Big Fitz before too long. As they steamed together towards the locks, the Fitzgerald heading for Detroit, and the Anderson for Gary, Indiana. The captain of the Anderson was Captain Jesse Bernie Cooper, a veteran of the business just as assuredly as Captain McSorley. He knew the capabilities of his own ship as well as the Edmund Fitzgerald. And while he wasn't afraid of the weather system approaching the Superior Lake, he knew to respect November storms, just as well as any mariner of the lakes that were worth their salt. He kept his eye on it, even as the Fitz passed her and took the lead. As the day of the 9th turned into the 10th, the two ships began to communicate. Both ships were equipped with weather observation and reporting equipment used by the National Weather Service to assist in tracking and reporting weather systems across the Great Lakes. The two skippers agreed that the storm looked like it would be a doozy. Together, they altered their course to hug the Canadian shore to try and shelter from the encroaching weather system. But as Cooper tracked the storm, he knew they would get hit before they could reach the relative safety of Whitefish Bay, Michigan.
Okay, let's pause the video of the story here for the time being. We'll get back to the ending of the video in a little bit, but now I want to talk about the actual investigation itself. And again, Maritime Horror's videos are amazing, and I love watching his videos, and I'm just grateful he lets us. He just he's cool with it, and I said we'll probably be doing a collaboration of some sort here in the next little while. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But we'll get back to the ending of this video in a little while. All right, this is something we don't see a lot. It's not the most exciting document, but it can give quite a dramatic insight into what's going on. This is the National Transportation Safety Board Marine Accident Report for the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sinking in Lake Superior, November 10th, 1975. Issued by our friend the United States government. Let's try to lengthen this as much as possible. That's what she said. There we go. And we have it on edit. We don't want to be drawing yellow lines everywhere. Okay, title and subtitle. The Marine Accident Report SS Edmund Fitzgerald sinking in Lake Superior on November 10th, 1975. If you look at box number 13, this report was November 10th, 1975 was the accident. And I believe, here we are, the report date in box number 5. This was May 4th, 1978. So about a year and a half this investigation took. Here's the abstract. About 17:15 Eastern Standard Time, it's 7:15 p.m. On November 10th, 1975, the Great Lakes bulk cargo vessel SS Edmund Fitzgerald, fully loaded with a cargo of taconite pellets, sank in eastern Lake Superior at a position of approximately 17 miles from the entrance to Whitefish Bay, Michigan. The ship was en route from Superior, Wisconsin to Detroit, Michigan, and had been proceeding at a reduced speed in a severe storm. All the vessel's 29 officers and crew members are missing and presumed dead. No distress call was heard by vessels or shore stations. The safety board considered many factors during the investigation, including stability, hull strength, operating practices, adequacy of weather-tight closures, hatch cover strength, possible groundings, vessel design, loading practices, and weather forecasting. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the accident was the sudden, massive flooding of the cargo hold due to the collapse of one or more hatch covers. We'll talk in detail about that here. And before the hatch covers collapsed, flooding into the ballast tanks and tunnel through topside damage and flooding into the cargo hold through non-weather-tight hatch covers caused a reduction of freeboard and a list. So what freeboard is the distance between the top of the water and the top of your deck. So if the vessel gets filled with water, if the ballast tanks are full, it settles lower into the water and your freeboard is shortened. And so they're saying that the one of the causes of the accident was the reduction of freeboard, which means the vessel was filling up with water and sinking lower into the water, which means there more and more waves can break over the top of the ship, which again puts more water inside and therefore reduces the freeboard even further. And a list, which means it's leaning off to one side. The hydrostatic and hydrodynamic forces imposed on the hatch covers by heavy boarding seas at this reduced the freeboard, and with the list caused the hatch covers to collapse. And so what that means, hydrostatic and hydrodynamic forces. The hydrostatic forces are essentially the weight of the water that's staying on top of the hatch covers. You know, the waves come up over the side of the ship, and the water settles on. Most of it goes off, some of it settles on top. And then the hydrodynamic forces are the waves that continue to pound on the hatch covers or on the side of the ship or whatnot. So basically it's like the static water and then the dynamic moving water, the hydrostatic, hydrodynamic things. So what they're saying is the waves come over, the waves continue to pound on the hatch covers, water settles on the hatch covers, which makes it heavier, which gets into the hold, which lowers the ship further in the water, lather, rinse, repeat until bad things happen. And eventually, in this case, what they're saying is it just caused the hatch covers themselves to just collapse. And once they collapse, the water just goes straight into the hold, and you lose a ship like that. Contributing to the accident was the lack of transverse weather-tight bulkheads in the cargo hold and a reduction of freeboard authorized by the 1969, 1971, and 1973 amendments to the Great Lakes Long Line Regulations. So these changes in the regulation allowed the ships to sit lower and lower and lower in the water, which means they can take on more and more cargo because the more cargo you take, the lower in the water you sit. So they've reduced the regulations to allow more cargo, etc. Let's get into this is just a sad, depressing read. Introduction. This casualty was investigated by a U.S. Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation, which convened in Cleveland, Ohio, on November 18th, 1975. I have that report too. That is, it's a couple hundred pages long, so I thought we'd skip that one. Just look at the NTSB report. A representative of the National Transportation Safety Board observed part of the proceedings. The Safety Board has considered all factors pertinent to the Safety Board's statutory responsibility to determine the cause or probable cause of the casualty and to make recommendations. Now, see, the Coast Guard, they're the ones that are responsible for enforcing laws and whatnot. The National Transportation Safety Board, they can make the recommendations. But they said here, the Safety Board's recommendations are made independently of any recommendations proposed by the Coast Guard. To assure public knowledge of all Safety Board recommendations, all such recommendations are published in the Federal Register. If the Coast Guard does not accept some of these Safety Board recommendations, the Coast Guard is required to set forth in detail the reasons for such refusal. This is one of the means by which the Safety Board exercises its responsibility of assessing the safety, operating, and regulatory practices of the U.S. Coast Guard. So essentially, yeah, these recommendations are just that. Recommendations that they don't necessarily have to follow. Synopsis. Here's the synopsis of the accident. About 1915 Eastern Standard Time on November 10th, 1975, the Great Lakes bulk vessel named SS Edmund Fitzgerald, fully loaded with a cargo of taconite pellets, sank in eastern Lake Superior in a position, we've read this part here up above, approximately 17 miles from the entrance to Whitefish Bay, Michigan. The ship was en route from Superior, Wisconsin to Detroit, Michigan, and had been proceeding at a reduced speed in a severe storm. All vessel's 29 officers and crew members are missing and presumed dead. No distress call was heard by vessels or shore stations. The Safety Board considered many factors during the investigation, including stability, hull strength, operating practices, adequacy of watertight closures, hatch coverings, possible groundings, vessel design, loading practices, and weather forecasting. And this basically just continues to repeat what we read above. The investigation of the accident. At about 0830 hours on November 9th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald began loading 26,116 long tons of taconite pellets at Burlington Northern Railroad, dock number 1 in Superior, Wisconsin. The pier, known as a chute pier, is equipped with built-in storage bins known as pockets, which are usually filled before a vessel arrives. Chutes are lowered from each pocket to direct the cargo into the hatches of the vessel. Most of the pockets are filled with 300 tons of taconite pellets. However, a few pockets are filled with 100 tons or 200 tons. These smaller amounts of cargo are used during the final phase of loading to trim the ship for departure. Because you've got to make sure the ship is balanced. If you put 8 million tons of cargo on one side and 30 pounds of cargo on the other side, it's gonna flip and it's gonna get ugly. So basically, it's exactly what it says. It's like a bin. If you filled a bin full of potatoes or whatever, you bring it over the hatch. You dump the potatoes in. Next bin comes over, dumps the next potatoes. You need a little bit here and a little bit there to balance it out at the end. Loading was completed at 14:15 on November 9th. The chief mate informed dock personnel that the vessel's final drafts were 27 feet 2 inches forward and 27 feet 6 inches aft. It's perfectly trimmed. The front side is the draft is the depth from the water line to the bottom of the hull. And so it's 27 feet 2 inches front, forward and aft. We're good. It's perfectly flat and level. Drafts were taken after receipt of the taconite pellets and 50,013 gallons of number 6 fuel oil delivered by a barge, which came alongside while the cargo was being loaded. Neither shipboard nor dock personnel experienced difficulties while loading the cargo, nor was any difficulty or damage reported by the crew of the Fitzgerald. Shoreside personnel saw the ship's crew replacing the hatch covers after loading. After departure at 14:15, the Fitzgerald proceeded at full speed of 99 RPMs, approximately 16.3 miles per hour. About 16:30, that's 4:30 p.m., the SS Arthur M. Anderson departed Two Harbors, Minnesota with similar cargo to carry en route to Gary, Indiana. Separated by 10 to 20 miles, the two vessels proceeded on similar courses across Lake Superior. And that's going to become very, very important as the investigation goes on into the events that took place at on the night of this incident. Because of predicted deteriorating weather, the receipt of storm warnings at 0200 on November 10th, and discussions by radio telephone, the Fitzgerald and Anderson departed their recommended shipping lanes along the southern shore of Lake Superior and proceeded northward, south of Isle Royale, then eastward along the northern shore, then southeastward along the eastern shore. This departure from the recommended track allowed the two vessels to take advantage of the lee provided by the Canadian shore. So the storms are coming in, so they got to get close as they can to the shore so that they have a little bit of a windbreak. So they're not in the normal shipping lanes. They're not on the normal route that the ships would take. This is a generally accepted practice among Great Lakes mariners to avoid adverse sea conditions during fall and winter storms, when the wind direction makes this lee available. During the first 10 to 11 hours of the voyage, the Anderson was ahead of the Fitzgerald. However, at about 3 a.m., 0300 hours on November 10th, the faster Fitzgerald pulled slightly ahead. The Fitzgerald made routine weather reports at 0100 and 0700 hours on November 10th. In the normal morning reporting to the company office, the Fitzgerald said her estimated time of arrival at Sault Ste. Marie was indefinite because of bad weather. So already they've known that they're not going to be on schedule. As the Fitzgerald and the Anderson approached the eastern shore, the Fitzgerald proceeded farther east than the Anderson before changing to a southeasterly course towards Michipicoten Island. Hope that's how you guys pronounce it up there. Michipicoten Island. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Since the Fitzgerald traveled a greater distance at a higher speed, the distance between the two vessels remained almost constant. So even though one's faster than the other, the Fitzgerald is taking a longer way, but they're kind of keeping their distance the same. About 12:52, the Anderson was abeam Otter Island at a range of 10.8 miles, and the Fitzgerald was 8 miles ahead and slightly east of the Anderson's track. At that point, the Fitzgerald was about 17 miles north-northwest of Michipicoten Island. At 13:50, the Anderson changed her course to 230 degrees to allow more sea room west of Michipicoten Island. We'll have to call it the island, because the wind was predicted to haul. We'll get here and we'll get back to that in a second. To haul to the northwest. So this is the track that they're saying the Fitzgerald took. Sailing down, and here's Michipicoten Island. And then right down here is where they found the wreckage. So you can see the timestamps they're talking about here. And meanwhile, the Anderson was essentially following it. At this time, the Fitzgerald was 2.5 to 3 miles southwest of Michipicoten Island. So right around here. That's 245 right there. Sorry. Fitzgerald continued southeastward toward Whitefish Point on a course of 141, while the Anderson proceeded southwest to about 11 miles west of Michipicoten Island and changed course to 130 at 1445. At this time, the Fitzgerald was observed about 16 miles ahead. They could see the Fitzgerald 16 miles up, at a position about 9 miles south of Michipicoten Island. At 15:20, it's 3:20 p.m., the Anderson changed course and a position of 7.7 miles west of the island. The Fitzgerald was 16 miles ahead and slightly to the right of the Anderson's track line. So they're still following about 16 miles behind ahead of the Anderson. The Anderson's about 16 miles behind, and now the Fitzgerald's just off to the right side, the starboard side of the Anderson. About 15:30, the Fitzgerald, then in a position northeast of Caribou Island, called the Anderson and reported, "I have a fence rail down. I've lost a couple of vents and have a list." So by 3:30 p.m., by 3:30 in the afternoon, they were already having problems. They'd already lost a ship's rail and a couple of the vents had been lost. So presumably the waves are already doing serious damage to the vessel, breaking one of the railings, knocking some of the vents off. They presume that's what was meant by they've lost a rail and a couple of vents, and they have a list. See, this is the problem when you have like these pellets and these cargoes and things like this. They have this thing called liquefaction, where even though it's a solid object like sand or pellets, if things continue to roll and pitch and too much, it can actually take on the characteristics of a fluid. That's the principle behind quicksand. It's sand, but it behaves like a liquid because of this liquefaction, and that's a possibility. Nobody really knows. It's not really talked about, but it could have just been just the strength of the wind and the way it was forcing the ship to pitch and roll that was shifting the cargo inside this giant, massive cargo hold to where they got too much cargo on one side and were starting to list. So, and this is at 3:30 in the afternoon. They're already having these problems. So Fitzgerald calls the Anderson, says, "I have a fence rail down. I've lost a couple of vents and have a list." The Fitzgerald further advised that she would check down to allow the Anderson to close the distance between the vessels. So they're going to slow down a bit. They're going to take the engines off a little bit, let the Anderson catch up. The Anderson asked the Fitzgerald if the pumps were going, and the reply was yes, both of them. So the Fitzgerald at 15:30 hours is already a problem, and they're taking on water. They're using both of their pumps to try to stay afloat. Kaiser Pineapple asks, "Have you heard the theory that they may have ran aground on a sandbar? That's why the rail came down. The ship's keel may have been damaged." That's actually something that's mentioned here in the report. So we'll get to that towards the end. It's pretty much been discounted for a lot of reasons, but they do mention the possible grounding here in the report. Excuse me. So they're using both of their pumps already. At 4:10 p.m., the Fitzgerald advised the Anderson. So this is 40 minutes later. The Fitzgerald advises the Anderson that both of her radars are inoperative, and that the Anderson keep track of the Fitzgerald and provide navigational assistance. So now put yourself in the situation here of the Edmund Fitzgerald, captain and crew. You're in the middle of a hellacious storm. A very, very heavy, very, very vicious storm. And what happens is while you're sailing along, while you're just minding your own business, you're trying your best, suddenly the storm worsens, you lose an entire railing of your ship. You start to take on water. You're starting to list to one side. You're running your pumps. And then in the middle of this storm, reduced visibility, obscenely heavy waves and wind, you lose your radar. Both of your radars. You are blind. They're sailing blind. They're sailing so blind that they have to ask the Anderson, the ship that's 16 miles away. They're asking the Anderson to please use your radar to help us navigate. We're absolutely blind out here. I can't imagine the terror that you would be feeling, knowing that you are utterly helpless and blind, taking on water, listing to the side. You're running your pumps. You have no radar, and you're relying on a ship 16 miles away to help you. It just creeps me out. Isn't a real word, but it's terrifying to think about. To think about being in that kind of a situation. Well, so, and again, this is just a case of just when you think it couldn't get any worse. Of course it does. So they've lost both of her radars and asked the Anderson to keep track of the Fitzgerald and provide navigational assistance. At 16:34, 30 minutes later, the Anderson changed course to 141 in position of 7.5 miles from the north end of Caribou Island and observed the Fitzgerald 14 to 15 miles ahead and slightly to the right of the Anderson's heading flasher. So they're still 14, 15 miles away at 4:30. At 5:30, at 17:28, an hour later, the Anderson fixed her position at 10.5 miles east of Caribou Light, determined that the Fitzgerald, so now they can't see the Fitzgerald, they're just determining that it's about 15 miles ahead and slightly left of the Anderson's heading flasher. They advised the Fitzgerald that Whitefish Point was 35 miles from the Fitzgerald on a bearing of 144. The Fitzgerald replied that she wanted to be 2.5 miles off Whitefish Point and appeared to be steering for that position. So they're fighting just to get in the general vicinity of Whitefish Point at this point. 16:39, another hour. So it's I guess this is back. We're going back in time. We were at 5:28 p.m. Now we're going back to 4:39. At about 4:39 p.m., 16:39, the Coast Guard station at Grand Marais, Michigan, or Marais, advised the Fitzgerald in response to her inquiry that the radio beacon at Whitefish Point was not operating. So here we have them in this, they're taking on water, they're listing, both pumps are working furiously. Both of their radars go out. They're utterly blind. They're relying on another ship for navigation. And 30 minutes after they lose both of their radar, the Coast Guard tells them that the radio beacon that they're hoping to get to is not operating. So they don't have any radio contact using the Whitefish Point radio beacon. Between 5 and 5:30, 1700 and 1730 hours, a Great Lakes registered pilot on board the northbound Swedish vessel Avafors in a position near Whitefish Point answered a call from the Fitzgerald. And said the Whitefish Point light was operating, but that the radio beacon was still off. The lighthouse is functioning, but the radio beacon isn't. JKD Buck says, now how did both radars go out? That's how bad this storm was. It was literally just beating the ship to pieces. And the Coast Guard's radio beacon is going out. It's beyond a nightmare situation, and there's still more to come. So they're told the lighthouse is operating, but the radio beacon is still off. During a radio telephone conversation between the two vessels, the master of the Fitzgerald apparently spoke to personnel aboard the Fitzgerald while the radio telephone remained in transmit mode. So he's talking to the Swedish ship, but he's also talking to his crew members while it's still broadcasting. And the master was overheard saying, "Don't allow nobody on deck. followed by some conversation concerning a vent which was not understood aboard the Ava Force. The master advised the Ava Force that the Fitzgerald had a bad list. So just shortly before that, it was 2 hours before that, it was a list. Now it's a bad list. They had lost both radars and were taking heavy seas over the deck in one of the worst seas he had ever encountered. Now, mind you, this was a captain that had extensive, lengthy decades of life at sea, and this was one of the worst seas he had ever seen. And taking heavy seas over the deck, we'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit, but essentially that means huge waves are crashing over, which is adding stress to the hatch covers and taking on more water and causing more problems. At 6:20 p.m., the Anderson advised the Fitzgerald that the Fitzgerald was working to the left of the Anderson's heading and determined by radio telephone that the Fitzgerald was steering. So they're relaying, this is what your heading is. This is where you are, and this is what direction you're going, because they can't tell that themselves. At 1900 hours, at 7 p.m., the Anderson advised the Fitzgerald that she was 10 miles ahead and 1 to 1.5 miles to the left, to the east of the Anderson's heading. At 1910, 10 minutes later, the Anderson advised the Fitzgerald of northbound traffic 9 miles ahead of her. So through all of this, they're blind, they're lost out there. The Coast Guard radio beacon is off. They've lost their radar. They're taking on water. They're listing heavily. They're relying on a ship 10 miles away to tell them what their heading is and where they're going. And in response to a question about her problems, how are you? Tell us your situation. The Fitzgerald replied, "We are holding our own." This was the last radio telephone conversation with the Fitzgerald. That was where we're holding our own is the last message anyone heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. This was the last radio telephone conversation. When the Anderson's radar scope was checked at about 1920 hours, there was no radar contact with her. So presumably at around 7:20 p.m., the Fitzgerald sank. No more radio contact. They had the last radio contact at 1910. 10 minutes later at 1920, no radio contact, no radar contact. Visibility increased about this time, and although lights on shore more than 20 miles away and lights of a northbound vessel 19 miles away could be seen, the Fitzgerald, which should have been approximately 10 miles away, was not visible. Between 1920 and 2030, the Anderson tried calling the Fitzgerald on VHF FM radio, but got no response. At 2032, that's 8:32 p.m., the Anderson notified the Coast Guard that the Fitzgerald may have suffered a casualty. Wreckage identified as that of the Fitzgerald was located in a position of this location in 530 feet of water in eastern Lake Superior, just north of the international boundary in Canadian waters. This position correlates with the last position that the Fitzgerald as reported by the Anderson. I will continue to read some more of that. That's the incident investigation. That's the actual accident investigation that they were able to piece together from talking to the Anderson, talking to the Swedish vessel, looking at their own radar logs and whatnot, they're taking times from radio communications. That's the best they could come up with as far as explaining the facts surrounding the sinking. Rolf Skull, thank you again so much for another Canadian $5. I believe your cousin was in my group. He may have met my friend from the Vancouver area on your mission, Mark. Well, Mark, that's pretty cool. It's a small world. His dad was CFO of Ansys Terminals. Jason Gilman Jr., thank you so much for being a member for 11 months. Can confirm firsthand, the weather on Lake Superior ain't a joke. It's there in the song, man. The weather on Superior ain't a joke. Boat I was on summer 2004 had to dip into the Keweenaw Peninsula to get some cover. I don't know where that is. I'm sorry, but scary if that's a summer storm you're having to deal with. Adara the Wholesome, thank you so much for your super chat. Yeah, I know I'm late. Good morning, Lorax. You're familiar with the story of the USS Barb, the only sub to sink a train? Yes, I am familiar. Also, any good $40 whiskeys? I can never recommend Basil Hayden enough. Basil Hayden is a great $40 whiskey. If you're able to get a bottle of Blanton's for $40, you'll never want for another delicious whiskey again. But yeah, Basil Hayden's a good solid one. And any of the Wild Turkey in the $40 range will do just fine. And Bad Weather Biker, thank you. We gave you the big one there. Listen, take that back. The $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Bad Weather Biker. Mishipi Cotton, accent on the mish. Well, you put the accent on the E, but we don't have to pronounce that anymore. I don't think so. Thank you, thank you so much for that. I muddled my way through as best I was able. Thank you for all those super chats again. For the camera is deciding that it's given up the USB ghost. I will replace the camera, and we will just have full-time doggo cam tomorrow as a reward for today. Somebody please remind me of that so that I don't forget. And before we jump back into the report, we have 200 Watt Studio with a $5 super chat. When I was a kid, my dad took me to Whitefish Point. Great memory and connection with Edmund Fitzgerald and my dad. I do want to get to the museum up there. That's a bucket list item. I've got friends in Detroit, so yeah, I want to get up. I want to get up there. Kiwana. All right, if you say so. That's not how I spell. I spell Kiwana like you do. All right, let's get back to the report here. There's a lot more of this report to cover as we go through here. And I just want to say thank you to the 466 of you that are here right now. Thank you for the 359 likes. Now is a good time just to do a very, very quick midstream grifty thing here. Hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, this is what we do every Monday. Every Monday we do a Maritime Monday where we talk about shipping disasters, shipping related news, and we're actually going to tell some good stories that don't involve tragedy at some point. But there's so many accidents out there, so many big important things in the world of shipping to talk about. Other days we talk about other trials, the Murdoch trial, the YNW Melly trial coming up. We do a chill stream with O.J. Simpson every Thursday, but we're going to wrap that up in about 3 weeks and move on to a different old trial. And this Friday will be F It Friday, where we just kind of have a panel of guests to come on, and we just sit and talk and we grift for drink. It's the once a month where we try to get that out of the way. But please, if you have been here for a few minutes, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe, take a risk, take a chance on me. We have our little like and subscribe poll. It's given the seriousness of the matter today, we've just said please hit the like and subscribe. 56% of you said okay, and 44% of you said done. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Let's get back to the story. What happened? What went wrong? What caused the accident? What recommendations came from this? Those are the big questions we need to answer now. So let me bring this on up. All right, the report now here. No, I don't want to move content. I want you to stop being blue. That's what I want. There. There's some information about the crew members and information about the vessel itself, and giving the details, length, whatnot. But there's a couple points I wanted to make here. There were the hatch. We talked about the hatch covers collapsing as a possible reason for the accident. There were 21 cargo hatch openings. Each opening measured 11 feet longitudinally and 48 feet transversely. So you're looking there 11 feet long. So what's that? About 3 meters, a little over 3 meters. And then they're about 48 long. So it's 10, 12 or 13 meters long. So that's their dimensions. They're just steel covers. And each had a 24-inch coaming above the weather deck. So that means the coaming is it's like a chimney, I guess, is kind of the best way to describe it. There's the deck, and then there's 24 inches of like a lip or a rim that the hatch cover sits on. The hatch covers were made of 5/16 inch stiffened plate with a 9/16 inch rubber gasket around the underside of the plate's perimeter. So that's how they make them airtight and watertight. They put these gigantic slabs of steel on top of the hatch covers. They are the hatch covers. They put them on top of the hatch openings, and then you lock them down so that they compress into the rubber gaskets, and that keeps them water and airtight, and watertight, weathertight. And each hatch cover was secured by 68 manual operated Kessner clamps on 2-foot centers. Each clamp had an adjustment bolt which determined the force applied by the individual clamp and therefore controlled the deflection of the hatch cover, the compression of the rubber gasket, and the weather tightness of the hatch opening. There were no written procedures concerning maintenance or adjustment of the hatch clamps or gaskets. An electronically operated hatch cover crane, which ran on rails outboard of the cargo hatch openings, was used for lifting the hatch covers. I mean, these are huge plates of steel that weigh tons and tons each. So they have the special hatch cranes that move the hatch covers and lift them up, take them off, and then put them back when they're done loading the cargo. And here's a view of the Fitzgerald. This is the one. Look at this the smaller one over here. This is if you cut the ship in half and you were looking straight at it. The giant cargo hold is here. And again, as we've talked about with other shipping accidents, there was no sealable ballast or walls or compartments to keep the water from running the length of the ship. So if you get a hole in one part of the ship, it just fills the entire ship with water. That's kind of a problem. Scroll on down here again. Talk about the bilge system, the water system. This is the freeboard. The different temperatures and the different seasons actually affect how your vessel sits in the water. So you have summer load lines and winter load lines, etc. This just sets all of this out. During its operating years, the Fitzgerald sustained damage from one grounding, one collision, and several instances of striking lock walls. You saw at the beginning how tight of a fit that was going through those locks. And they're just constantly bouncing off of it. All damaged structure was removed and replaced as original. So basically, those particular incidences of damage didn't contribute to the accident. They were repaired and made new. The Fitzgerald was last dry docked in Cleveland. Dry docked is exactly what it says. You dry dock. You take the entire ship out of the water and put it on land, do the thorough in-depth inspections, and do any repairs that need to be done. It was last dry docked in Cleveland, Ohio in April 1974, so about a year and a half before the accident. With the accessible area of the interior and exterior structure and hull plating were examined and all damage was satisfactorily repaired. The Fitzgerald was last inspected by the Coast Guard and the ABS on October 31st, 1975. 10 days before the accident was the last inspection. 4 minor structural defects in way of the hatches were noted, and the Coast Guard ordered these defects to be repaired before the 1976 shipping season. The structural defects consisted of a 1-inch notch in the plate in way of hatch number 13, a 1-inch gouge in the plate. This is how detailed this ship is enormous. It's huge. And they're investigating down to 1-inch notches and 1-inch scratches. So a 1-inch gouge in the plate in way of hatch number 15, a 10-inch crack in number 16 hatch and girder, and a 1-inch crack at the intersection of the number 21 hatch combing and hatch end girder. All 4 defects probably resulted from damage from offloading equipment and did not affect the strength of the hull girder. So there was no significant damage to the ship. The weather, the weather was bad. Wind, so 5 knots, then it goes to 42 knots, then 43 knots. And at 452, it was 52 knots. It's getting heavy. My brain doesn't do the calculations well. The master of the Anderson testified that 10 or 12 miles north of Caribou Island, which is right around where that was the general vicinity of the accident. The seas were running 12 to 18 feet. So you're getting 18-foot waves and the south of Caribou Island, the seas were running 18 to 25 feet, 25-foot waves. That's a big ass wave. He further testified that he observed wind gusts of 70 to 75 knots. Let's see what our phone tells us. Convert 75 knots to miles per hour. 86 miles an hour. So 86 mile an hour winds. It was gusting up to 86 miles an hour. That's hurricane force winds they were facing on the lake. An NWS meteorologist testified that before the Fitzgerald sank, the average sustained wind speed was 45 knots from the northwest for a period of 6 to 7 hours, and these conditions would produce waves with a significant height of 15 feet. So sustained 15-foot waves, sustained 45 knots. Convert 45 knots to miles per hour. 51.78, so 52 miles an hour. Again, those are huge winds. Legendary Racing says, say 86 miles per hour one more time. 86 miles per hour. And sustained winds at 51 miles per hour. He also testified that there are usually 4 or 5 intense storms on the Great Lake during the fall to spring shipping seasons. A storm of the intensity of the one recorded on November 10th would not occur every year. However, more intense storms have been recorded on the Great Lakes. So, yeah, they're saying this isn't the worst storm there's ever been, but it's up there. Here's some more information about the ship, some more diagrams, how it's sitting on the bottom of the ocean. We'll show you that in the video at the end here. Down, some information about the waterways, the tests they're doing. This is a very, very detailed report. And if you just search for Fitzgerald NTSB report, you can read the whole darn thing all by yourself. The sinking. This is their analysis of the sinking. Xterra Bill says, Jeff, there is video footage of the bell recovery. Yes, we watched that last year in my video. So if you go back to last year's Edmund Fitzgerald video, there is a video of the bell raising that we put there. The sinking. An analysis of the wreckage itself did not give any conclusive evidence as to the cause of the sinking of the Fitzgerald. To this day, we don't know for 100% what happened. However, an analysis of the final events in conjunction with the wreckage indicated that the Fitzgerald experienced massive flooding of the cargo hold just before she sank. When the master of the Fitzgerald first reported topside damage to the vessel at 15:30 on November 10, he stated that he had a fence rail down and lost 2 vents and had both pumps going. Flooding was occurring in more than one ballast tanks, the tunnel, or a combination of ballast tanks and the tunnel. At the same time, because of the severe sea conditions, water was entering the vessel's cargo hold through non-weather tight hatch covers. They're blaming the hatch covers that they weren't as weather tight as they should have been. Between 15:30 and the sinking, the Fitzgerald deck was awash with green water. Since the shear strake extended 15 3/8 inches above the weather deck for the entire length of the vessel, water would have been trapped on deck. So 15 3/8 inches, that's about this much here. There was essentially a wall around the entire deck. It was about this high. So just the tons and tons and tons of water that would make up the entire surface of the deck of the vessel, 15 3/8 inches deep, is resting on the hatch covers. So the shear strake extended 15 3/8 inches above the weather deck for the entire length of the vessel aside, and the water would have been trapped on the deck. The combined effect of the water in the ballast tanks, the tunnel, the cargo hold, and on deck would have decreased the vessel's freeboard. Again, that's the distance between the surface of the water and the top of your deck. So the hold is filled with water. All of the The undership tunnels are full of water. It's taking on more water. There's a bunch of water trapped on the deck, so it's forcing the deck of the ship closer and closer to the surface of the water. The combined effect of the water in the ballast tanks, tunnel, and cargo hold and on deck would have decreased the vessel's freeboard, permitted more water to enter the cargo hold, and increased the trim or list indicated by the ballast tank or tunnel flooding. That's self-explanatory. You have a bunch of water that's forcing you down. The more you get forced down into the water, the more the waves are allowed to come on the ship and wash over your deck, and which collects more water in the hold. The safety board determined through its structural analysis of the hatch covers that the sea state, combined with the loss of freeboard and the trim caused by flooding, could have imposed sufficient hydrostatic loads to cause a hatch cover failure and collapse under static loading. So just the sheer weight of the water on the hatch covers, they suspect caused one or more of them to just collapse inward. And then, of course, all of the water on the outside goes to the inside and you go down. The safety board calculations assumed a wave height of 25 feet. This was based on the Anderson's observations of significant wave heights from 18 to 25 feet. A significant wave height of 25 feet means that the average height of 1/3 highest waves is 25 feet. The safety board also calculated that by 1915 hours on November 10th, sufficient water had entered the hull of the Fitzgerald to reduce its freeboard to near zero at hatch number 1. So essentially, there was enough water in the ship by 1915, which is right about the time they suspect you went down. The distance between the top of the water and the top of your deck was zero, which means they were sinking. And so when there is zero distance between the ocean and the top of your deck, a wave of 25 feet in height would yield a static head of 12.5 feet. This static head was sufficient to cause hatch cover failure. So essentially they get 12.5 feet of water weight smashing on top of a hatch cover. It collapses the hatch cover inwards. And the problem, well, it's not really a problem because this wasn't expected. The hatch covers were designed to withstand a 4-foot head of water. So basically it was 3 times more water weight than they were designed to handle. The quartering seas would cause a piling effect. A quartering sea is basically when you're going 45 degrees into a wave. So the wave is coming at you from a quarter angle, from about a 45-degree angle. This would cause a piling effect in the areas behind the forward deck house, thus increasing the static head. Any stresses caused by the dynamic forces of the boarding water, that means the effects of the waves coming onto the ship, would have added to the already existing static stresses, which would have accelerated the hatch cover failure. The hatch cover failure would have been severe enough to allow rapid, massive flooding of the cargo hold. And as we talked about a minute ago, since there were no watertight bulkheads within the cargo hold, the flooding water would have progressed throughout the hold within minutes, causing the vessel to sink bow first to the bottom of the lake. Upon impact with the bottom, the midship portion disintegrated and the stern section rolled over, coming to rest upside down. The Fitzgerald did not explain what caused the damage to the fence rail and the vents. However, whatever caused this damage probably also caused some localized structural damage to the vessel's hull plating. They're saying if the waves are strong enough, or whatever was strong enough to cause the rail and the vents to break, what probably was also pounding and doing some damage to the hull. The outside of the ship. This damage to the hull plating would have permitted flooding into the tunnel and into the ballast tanks faster than the pumps could remove the water and thereby eliminate the list. The topside damage could have been caused by the vessel striking a floating object, which was brought aboard by heavy seas or some object on board, such as a hatch cover crane or spare propeller blade breaking away in the heavy seas. So the damage to the rail and the vents could have happened from something breaking off the ship in the wind, whether it was a crane or something. After the Fitzgerald master reported damage at 15:30, it's 3:30 p.m., the sea conditions became worse. 10 or 12 miles north of Caribou Island, the seas were 12 to 18 feet high, and below Caribou Island, the seas were 18 to 25 feet. Any structural damage to the shell plating would have propagated under the higher stress levels caused by these conditions. So whatever was wrong with the hull of the ship, it just got worse as the storms got worse. Visual inspection by the Coast Guard, marine inspections during the winter of 1976 and the spring of 1977, and by safety board personnel during the summer of 1977 indicate that the hatch covers on the Great Lake vessels are not maintained weather tight. A detailed analysis of the amount of water that could have entered the cargo holds through openings between the hatch covers and the hatch combings of the Fitzgerald on November 10, 1975 were made by both the Coast Guard and the Safety Board. Both analyses showed that the current hatch designs on the Great Lake vessels, such as the Fitzgerald, would have permitted significant amounts of water to enter the Fitzgerald's hold under the sea conditions encountered then. The effect of this flooding on both trim and list could have been determined by using the trim and list indicating instruments. The instruments could also have provided an indication of the rate of change. Move on down here. Between 1700 and 1730, the master of the Fitzgerald told the Eva Force that I have a bad list. I've lost both radars and I'm taking heavy seas over the deck in one of the worst seas I've ever been in. In order for the Fitzgerald to have developed a bad list 2 hours after the list was first reported, the flooding rate into the ballast tanks must have exceeded the vessel's pumping capacity. Okay, that's basic common sense. You're listing more because you're taking on more water than you can release through your pumping efforts. And then in 1910, the Fitzgerald reported that we are holding our own. However, shortly thereafter, the Fitzgerald sank. Because there were neither witnesses nor survivors, and because the scattered wreckage on the lake bottom did not indicate a definite mode of hull failure, the exact sequence of events culminating in the sinking of the Fitzgerald cannot be completely substantiated. Two possibilities are discussed. So there's two main considerations they did. First, the increased weight of the flooding water could have caused a massive structural failure while the Fitzgerald was still on the surface, which caused the vessel to break into two sections. So they're saying it could have just broke in half while it was still afloat and then sank in two separate pieces. However, an analysis of the various flooding conditions indicated that the stress levels from the longitudinal bending moments were well below that which would cause structural failure on the surface. They're saying, yeah, it broke up underwater, not while it was still above. Second, the reduced freeboard and loss of transverse stability from flooding could have caused the Fitzgerald to capsize, just rolled over. If 3 or less adjacent ballast tanks on the same side were completely flooded, the Fitzgerald would not have capsized. So they basically got rid of those suggestions. The bow section would have had to right itself, and the stern portions would have. They're just saying it doesn't work out from their analysis. But there's also this possible grounding that some of you have mentioned, and Kaiser Pineapple mentioned earlier. There is some people say that perhaps it struck a sandbar. Safety board investigators consider the possibility that flooding resulted from a grounding which ruptured the hull plating in the area of some ballast tanks, but rejected this possibility for the following reasons. A reconstruction of the Fitzgerald's most probable track line shows her path to be about 3 miles from the nearest position where the grounding could have occurred. No gouges, scrapes, fractures, indentations, or other indications of grounding were visible on the exposed bottom plating on the after section of the wreckage. These observations were made during a close examination of the exposed bottom plating by underwater television from a Curve 3. Damage to the bottom plating of the vessel from grounding or boulders in the rocky shoal north of Caribou Island during the severe sea conditions would probably have extended into the bottom plating of the stern section. The Fitzgerald's full speed was reported to be 16.3 miles per hour. At this speed, it was impossible for the Fitzgerald to pass through her 1520 position, as determined by the Anderson. So basically, they're saying the ship could not have been where it was where the sandbar was, where any grounding could have occurred. And even if it had been, there was no evidence on the bottom of the ship that they could see underwater that showed any indication that there was any grounding whatsoever. So they've said no, they don't consider that to be even a possibility. Although the list was not reported until 1530, they conclude the topside damage occurred before 1520. It's unlikely that the Fitzgerald would have instantly reported the damage. If an immediate report had been made, it probably would have just mentioned damages more serious than just a list, the loss of a rail or damage of the vents. So they're saying if there would have been a catastrophic failure back when it was supposed to be near this grounding event, they would have said more than just, oh, we lost a rail and a couple of vents. They would have reported much more serious damage. Couple of more things here, and then it's getting wrap-up time. So that, they've made some comments about the charts and the weather forecasting and the loading information. These are very, very detailed reports, but I want to just get through the conclusions here. Irish Rover says, I love how it's referred to as sea conditions. It's sea conditions. These are large enough to be seas. They are the large, they're essentially inland seas, and they do refer to them as seas. Findings. 1. The Fitzgerald's hatch covers were not weather tight and allowed water to enter the cargo hold over an extended period. The water was not detected because it migrated down through the cargo. There was no method provided for sounding the cargo other than visual observations, nor was there any method for dewatering the cargo hold with the vessel trimmed by the bow. 2. Amendments to the Great Lakes load line regulations in 69, 71, and 73 allowed Great Lakes bulk carriers to load deeper. The deeper loading increased deck wetness, which caused an increase in the flooding rate. 3. The topside vents and fence rail were damaged before 1520, either by a heavy object coming adrift on deck or by a floating object coming aboard with the seas. The Fitzgerald hull plating probably was damaged also. The damage propagated and caused flooding of the ballast tanks and tunnel. 4. Flooding of ballast tanks in the tunnel caused trim and a list. Detection of ballast tank flooding prompted the ballast pumps to be started. However, the flooding rate through the hull damage, which was propagating, increased and exceeded the capacity of the pumping systems. The hull stress levels, even with a substantial amount of flooding, were low enough that the hull girder did not fail before the sinking. 6. The forces on the hatch covers were caused by boarding seas, by the waves coming up over the railing. They were sufficient to cause damage and collapse. These forces increased as flooding caused a list and reduced the vessel's freeboard. Flooding of the cargo hold caused by one or more collapsed hatch covers was massive and progressed throughout the hold. Flooding was so rapid that the vessel sank before the crew could transmit a distress call. Can you imagine literally fighting for your life for 4 hours? You send a message to someone, hey, we're doing our best, we're holding our own. And then something in the next 10 minutes happens so quickly, you can't even tell anybody. You don't have time to operate the radio to tell someone you're going down. It was an essentially instantaneous sinking. 8. The vessel either plunged or partially capsized and plunged under the surface. The hull failed either as the vessel sank or when the bow struck the bottom. The availability of a fathometer aboard the equipment lines. The most probable track line of the Fitzgerald lies east of the shoal of Caribou Island. Therefore, damage from grounding would have been unlikely. And with insufficient water depth has been observed. Some loading and discharge ports grounding these vessels can increase hulls. A lot of times they'll do that. I know they do that like a lot in the ports in Brazil, where they load these massive amounts of coal in these gigantic coal carriers. They'll actually, the ships will sail in, and then as the tide goes out, the ships will actually just rest in the mud. They'll actually bottom out, rest in the mud, and then when the tide comes back in, then they basically float and sail out. So that's what they're talking about here. If you just keep running your ship into the soft ground while you're berthing in these ports with shallow berthing depths, you can cause the damage to the ship. Loading information on the Fitzgerald and other Great Lakes bulk cargo was not adequate. So this is just kind of going through all of the procedural problems. The Great Lakes bulk cargo vessels normally can avoid severe storms. The limiting sea state for the Great Lakes bulk cargo vessel should be determined. So they give all these recommendations. Again, the probable cause of the accident. The NTSB determines that the probable cause of this accident was the sudden massive flooding of the cargo hold due to collapse of one or more hatch covers. Before the hatch covers collapsed, flooding into the ballast tanks and tunnel through topside damage and flooding into the cargo hold through non-weathertight hatch covers caused a reduction of freeboard and a list. And then eventually all the water on deck and coming on deck caused the hatch covers to collapse. They made some recommendations to ensure that all hatch covers, hatch combings, vents, and stuff are all in good repair. Use a ship rider program by Coast Guard Marine inspectors to inspect the hatch covers. And they just go down and list a number of recommendations to try to prevent something like this from ever happening. They require a means of detecting water in the cargo holds. Amend regulations for bilge pumps. Require the Great Lakes vessels to have emergency position indicator beacons, the EPIRBs, so the vessels lost or in serious danger can be located rapidly and accurately. And they go through here and they make those recommendations, not only for the Coast Guard to do these things, to make these requirements, but also to the American Bureau of Shipping, which is one of the classification societies that inspects the ships, and also to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They're the ones that make the maps back then. They were responsible for making the maps. And that is essentially the bulk of the NTSB report into the accident, into the sinking, with their determinations as to what happened, saying that it was unlikely that the ship broke up while it was still on the surface. It's unlikely that it ran aground somewhere a few hours before the sinking. And it's unlikely that anything other than just the accumulation of water, the forces of more waves piling onto the ship, caused the vessel to sink. Nose first, bow first, it hits the bottom of the ocean and breaks up into two pieces. Yeah, the life jackets, they did have 20, I think they had 49 life jackets on board, if I remember correctly. But yeah, this happened so quickly. Like I said, just in seconds, this thing would have gone. They didn't even have time to radio that they were going down. And we'll look at a little video here later just to kind of show you conditions in November on the lakes. Those of you that are there along the lakes right now, know that it's probably cold outside. What we want to do, let's Steve Gosney asked, what was the water temperature? Let's see, average Lake Superior temperature. November. The Lake Superior water temperature in November around Whitefish Point, where the accident occurred, that area is 48.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 39.6 Fahrenheit, 57.2 Fahrenheit. So yeah, you're looking at right around between 47 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to freeze in minutes. So for those of you in Celsius land, it's like 8 degrees. You're not swimming long in that. Now, there's a couple of stories here that I think are important to talk about, just kind of the bravery and the dedication of people. There was the other vessel, the Anderson. I told you we'd talk more about it later. The Anderson barely made it into port. They barely survived the storm themselves. That's a whole different story. Once the Anderson realized that the Fitzgerald probably went down, and then their struggle to get into port, this storm is pounding, and in something that, I can intellectually understand, but emotionally, I can't really understand. It's flabbergasting. It's phenomenal to me. The Anderson pulls into port, barely making it, barely getting out of the storm itself. The Coast Guard asks the captain of the Anderson if he would go back out on the lake and search for the Fitzgerald. Go back out into that life-threatening storm. They had just survived. And without hesitation, the captain and crew of the Anderson said yes, and they went back out into those seas that sank the Fitzgerald to look for wreckage, look for crew members, to literally go back to where the weather drove this ship under the water. And they went without hesitation. They went out and they searched. There was another ship that barely pulled into port, and they were asked by the Coast Guard to go back out, and they refused. Initially, the captain refused to go back out and said, hell no, we just got here into port. We just got safe. We're not going back out in that storm. Then he thought about it for a bit, and then he went out and joined the search as well. So these ships that barely made it themselves, that survived this storm, put their lives back on the line to search for the Fitzgerald wreckage and any crew members that somehow may have survived. Which, I mean, it's the brotherhood and the camaraderie of sailors is something. It's something special to witness. And that just in my line of business, when you have these shipping accidents, when you have these collisions, and you have these sinking, and you see the community come together to try to rescue people from a sinking ship, that search for missing crewmen. It's phenomenal, and it's breathtaking to see, and it's very, very, very humbling. It's quite emotional when you see the sailors mourning people that they've never heard of, they've never met, they'll never meet anybody in their family, but it's someone who is doing the same job as them, someone who's been out there on the lakes, who's been out there on the ocean. They don't know them, but they know them. Adara the Wholesome, thank you so much. All right, then, how about the USN L8 American Ghost Ship? Love to see that covered on a Maritime Monday. Definitely unique, given its different kind of ship. Do not know that one. Thank you. 200-watt studio with a $5 super chat. We actually went there a year before the museum was built. My dad just pointed to the sea and said, that's where it sank. I do want to get there. And Blue Varo, member for 7 months, says, I encourage people to visit Duluth, Minnesota, and take a tour of the William A. Irvin. That's a strong recommendation. I will keep that in mind as well. And Don Serena says, if you want to see the funniest joke on the Great Lakes, look at the names of the Sulaks. Okay. We'll do that. Thank you so much for that super chat. I think we are all caught up. Now, what I want to do here is we'll wrap this up and we'll go over to Megan Fox. She's interviewing Dr. Corcoran right now. But here's where the stream gets demonetized, because it happened at exactly the same point last year. I want to play through the last part. We got about I would say 15 minutes to go, and then we'll wrap this up. We'll say 15 to 20 minutes. We'll watch the last 7 minutes of Maritime Horror Story, Maritime Horrors, and then I'll talk you through what's the wrap up going to be. So let's pull up this last 7-minute video, which talks a little bit about the rescue efforts and what's happened since then, since the accident with the Fitzgerald.
Freighters that confirmed they had no radar contact of the Fitz, nor any sightings of it. By 2032, the Arthur M. Anderson called Coast Guard Group Sault Ste. Marie, stating, I'm very concerned with the welfare of the steamer Edmund Fitzgerald. He was right in front of us experiencing a little difficulty. He was taking on a small amount of water, and none of the upbound ships have passed him. I can see no lights as before, and don't have them on radar. I just hope he didn't take a nosedive. The Coast Guard began performing radio calls, when at 2100, the Anderson officially declared the Fitzgerald missing, and the Coast Guard immediately began a multi-unit search, even asking the Anderson to come about and brave the storm once more to assist in the search, to which they, of course, obliged. The Coast Guard scrambled helicopters from Coast Guard Station Traverse City, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Naugatuck from Sault Ste. Marie, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Woodrush from Duluth, Minnesota, even fixed-wing aircraft from the Canadian Coast Guard. Aircraft and rescue vessels began a massive search in the area. None of the 29 crew were found, dead or alive. The first bit of wreckage was found by the Anderson. At 0800 the next morning, they spotted pieces of one lifeboat, then another. Pieces of life jackets, a life raft, oars, air tanks, a heaving line, etc. But no personal effects, and no bodies. The damage to the lifeboats indicated they were still locked in their cradles when they were wrenched from the ship. They weren't launched. An oil slick was found, a bit of diesel oil from the bow thruster, and some bunker C main propulsion fuel. But it was a very small amount. The water at the bottom was so cold that the viscosity of the oil increased to the point that it would no longer leak from the wreck. But the wreck wouldn't be pinpointed until the 14th of November, when side-scan sonar would identify two large objects in the bottom. They would scan it several times, but couldn't conclude it was the Edmund Fitzgerald for certain. It wouldn't be until May of the next year when the Navy brought out their Curve 3 unmanned underwater vehicle. Equipped with an underwater camera, the vehicle was able to get visual confirmation that the wreck was in fact the Edmund Fitzgerald. Sitting at the bottom in 530 feet of water, she was split into two sections only around 200 feet separate.
That's what she looks like now. They're at the bottom of Lake Superior. The halves 200 feet apart. The stern of the vessel capsized and laying upside down.
The bow sitting flat on her keel, upright, a huge impact area in front of her. Her stern flipped over and slightly at an angle, with an enormous debris field spilled out between the two sections. At first, there were no remains documented. Now came the hard part, investigating just what had happened. The Coast Guard and NTSB launched a massive investigation poring over everything. Eyewitness testimonies from the Arthur M. Anderson's crew, testimony from the loaders from the Burlington Northern Railroad docks, seeing her previous and past inspections, testimony from past crewmen and captains. They looked at the wreckage and logs kept from the Coast Guard, other ships in the area, weather reports, etc. Finally, after months of investigations, the Coast Guard released their final report, with a conclusion to their findings. It was believed that the clamps on the hatch coverings had failed, or were improperly secured, leading to a slow and steady flooding of the cargo hold. As waves rolled over to the spar deck, they caused the hold to fill with water. Slowly, the Edmund Fitzgerald lost stability until she plunged beneath the waves and sank to the bottom of Lake Superior. But many disagreed. In fact, the president of the Lake Carriers Association, former Coast Guard Vice Admiral Paul E. Trimble, wrote the NTSB and U.S. Coast Guard, denouncing their findings and stating what they concluded was absolutely incorrect. Theories began to circulate, ranging from things such as massive rogue waves to suggesting the Fitzgerald had underwater damage from striking the 6-fathom shoal. Others pointed to a hull inspection performed about a week beforehand that came up with fractures in the ship's hull, suggesting she broke up similarly to the Bradley and Morel.
Okay, where someone was asking what a spar deck was. Where did that go? Oh yeah, J.K. Buck says spar deck. Spar deck's the upper deck. So this is like the spar deck would be like up here. It's like an upper deck on the ship.
A few decades prior. Many were unsatisfied with the official report and sought out to disprove it themselves. Subsequent dives were performed on the wreck to try and pry into the secrets of Mighty Fitz, looking over everything from hatch covers to the integrity of the keel to stress points on the ship, until finally in 1994, a body was discovered. An unidentified crewman wearing coveralls and a cork vest. He lay near the bow on the lake floor.
That's how cold it is 500 feet under Lake Superior, that the bodies are just preserved the way they went down 48 years ago.
Facing upwards to the surface, on his back. Who was he? How had he gotten to the outside of the hull? Why was he wearing a cork vest? Unfortunately, we may never know. What were those final minutes like? What had happened after McSorley left the radio? Why was no distress caller Mayday made? despite someone presumably being within arm's distance of the radio. Had the ship truly made a nosedive, or did she slowly split apart at the surface? Unfortunately, we may never know. As of 2005, the Ontario Heritage Act put an end to dives on the Edmund Fitzgerald, declaring the site a burial ground. What we now know may be all we ever know. The truth of what happened to those 29 men aboard Fitzgerald will go with them to the bottom. So I'm sure you're wondering what I think happened, and to be honest, I do have my theories. But I'm practically a layman in this field. I was not an investigator in the Coast Guard. I was a navigator and coxswain. Instead, I want to know, what do you think happened? Comment your theory and discuss with others in the comments. Do you believe the official U.S. Coast Guard report, or do you think it was something else entirely? Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do by simply liking and subscribing and sharing with your friends.
Go give Maritime Horrors all the love.
As well as
the link is down below.
My underpaid channel artist. She designed some awesome merch for the channel. You can get some cool shirts, masks, or if you're a true sailor, a coffee mug. Just use the link in the description. I'll be honest, this video should have been released weeks ago, but right when I was about to release it, a bigger channel released a video on the exact same thing. So,
well, we don't need to, but please go show Maritime Horror some love. He does some great videos. He's a big supporter of the channel, and he lets us use his videos. Great guy. Link is down there in the description. Now here's where I say goodbye to you, and we say goodbye to monetization as we roll out the last, say, 15 minutes of our video here. We're gonna do three things. We're gonna show you the Arthur M. Anderson. The Arthur M. Anderson is still in service after 71 years. The Arthur M. Anderson that went alongside, that followed the Fitzgerald, that went back out into the storm, was launched in 1952. So it's the ship is still serving after 71 years. And what I want to show you is Duluth, Minnesota Harbor. This was in 2020, so it was 3 years ago. The ships will sometimes do what's called a master salute, and that's basically where they use all of the whistles on a vessel, where the captain will give a salute to someone or something with 3 very long blasts on the horns and 2 shorter blasts, and they'll do that to show respect. What I'll show you first is a video of the Arthur M. Anderson giving a master's salute to the Edmund Fitzgerald on the anniversary on November 10th, 2020, coming through port. And it's not just to show you this other ship and to showing respect for the Fitzgerald on the anniversary of the Fitzgerald sinking, but watch the storm. It's in a storm coming in through Duluth port. You can see the wind whipping, the wind blowing, the snow pounding. But notice that this was about 11-mile-an-hour winds that you're going to see in the video. And we're talking there was gusts 8 times worse than this that were faced by these 2 ships on the Great Lake. So we'll show you the Arthur M. Anderson rendering honors to the Edmund Fitzgerald as it passes through Duluth Harbor. We'll show another video, and then we'll wrap it up with a video of the bell that was raised from the Edmund Fitzgerald, and I'll just do a peace out at the end of that without any outro. The final thing I want to remind you of is again going back to the Gordon Lightfoot song, "Rip Gordon Lightfoot." The words, when you listen to the words next time, when you hear the song "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald" again, think about the information and what actually happened, and bring those lyrics to life. I mean, we're saying, the wind and the waves made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. That's a nice lyric, but those are 25-foot waves crashing over the railing, pounding on the hatch covers. At 7 p.m., the main hatchway caved in. The ship went down like that. And for me, it's one of the most powerful lyrics for some reason of any song ever, and it really, really gets to me. Just as I said, think for 4 hours, just for 4 hours, you've lost your 2 radar. You're blind out there in the middle of this storm with 25-foot waves, 81-mile-an-hour winds. You're running blind. You're trying to get your bearings from a ship 16 miles away from you. You're just trying to get into port. The Coast Guard radio tower, the relay station isn't working. You've got no help. You've got your pumps running, and that brings life to those words. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Just how long each one of those minutes would have felt on board the Fitzgerald. Next time you hear the song, listen to the lyrics. And again, now when I show this video, mind you that the wind and the weather you're going to see on this, while the Arthur M. Anderson is rendering its honors for the Edmund Fitzgerald as it goes through the port of Duluth. Remember, the storm was 8 times what you're seeing in this video. I want to read the last few super chats. I'm not going to come back once these videos start. We'll end when they end. So please, if any more super chats come in, we'll read them tomorrow. But I won't be reading any more of the super chats here. Let's see, where are we at? Here we are. This is the last one we had. 200-watt studio. Thank you so much. He has taken my brother and I to somewhere Falls for a camping trip. When we left, he played the song and took us to Whitefish Point. That's a hell of a good memory. And that's one memory that's on my bucket list that I want to have that memory at some point in my life as well. We've already got that one. Thank you so much for that. All right. Here's the Arthur M. Anderson rendering honors to the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 10th, 2020, as it goes through Duluth Port. Notice the storm and times that by 8. Let me bring this up full for you there. And we'll catch you all tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. That's the Arthur M. Anderson. You're saying you couldn't hear the sound on that? Well, that's not what you want to hear, is it? Well, then I will go back and play it again. Well, so while we're doing that, while I'm scrolling that back, did you notice this? How the snow was whipping around there, how the wind was whipping, and that's 11 miles an hour. Again, as I mentioned before. Watch the flag, watch the snow blowing under the lights, and just times it by 8, and you'll get the Fitzgerald. Now this should be really really loud. So no, it actually is. It is quiet until it cuts away. You'll get this here. We'll bring it on up. Don't know what the deal was, but should have the sound now. Notice the flag and the snow. This was 11-mile-an-hour winds, not the 81-mile-an-hour winds and 25-foot waves. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Of the Sault Ste. Marie Navy League. Ernest M. McSorley, Captain. John H. McCarthy, First Mate. James A. Pratt, Second Mate. Michael E. Armagost, Third Mate. John D. Simmons, Wheelsman.
I've got to shut that down there. They gave me a copyright warning for that. The people. The links are down there if you want to watch their bell ringing, the or the Edmund Fitzgerald song. But they gave me a warning there, so to keep me on here, we had to shut it down. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you all tomorrow. Click on the videos down below too if you want to see the bell ringing ceremony.